Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's third and final session of the Investigative Reporting Workshop. Today we have Aaron Glantz with us from NPR's California Newsroom Initiative. Aaron, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for making the time. And I guess this is a veterans group, so that means that we start exactly on time, but then people come in because they're no longer in the military. So I will just talk for just a minute while I get set up here. Oh, oops. I'm still learning. Like, we've been doing this virtual thing for like years now, and I'm still learning the right buttons. Stand by. I am going to talk, I call this talk Turning Your Beat into Investigative Coverage, but I could also call it How to Lean into Your Lived Experience, Focus on What Matters, and Make the Change You Want to See in the World. And the reason I say that is because we have a group here of military veterans who are in journalism, and that is a superpower, right? We live in a society where most people do not have this expertise, and it can be hard to enter into that newsroom culture sometimes, which doesn't have as many veterans. But it's also like something that you bring to the table and your own lived experience. And it can help if you're a journalist who really wants to help, do stories around military and veterans issues, in particular, that makes a difference. Then this is going to be a talk that hopefully will be useful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself at the outset. I was not in the military. I was a journalist during this time, working unembedded. So I was with the Iraqi people, kind of out in the streets, et cetera, while other journalists were embedded. And so on April 9th, 2003, shortly after that, I drove in those of you who've been in Iraq, and like one of those checkered taxis from Amman, Jordan, by all of the gas stations that have been bombed, ended up in Baghdad shortly after this. On this day, when this guy gave this speech declaring mission accomplished, I was in Fallujah, sitting in a very anti-American mosque, listening to a guy give Friday prayers. And this was actually on the day that some of the first bloodshed was shed after the fall of Baghdad, with protests and funerals and all that stuff that became very commonplace later. I ended up watching over the period of time that I reported there, the US military initially being really greeted as liberators for overthrowing Saddam, who was a tyrant, and then watching people being really torn up because their family members were incarcerated at Abu Ghraib. So this is some reporting that I did outside of Abu Ghraib in 2004. I attacked the attack on the Muqtada Sadr movement from the perspective of the Sadr movement. I was in Fallujah in April 2004 when so many people were killed that the municipal soccer stadium was turned into a graveyard. And I came home and I was pretty fucked up, but I was also lucky enough to get a book contract where I got to write about it. And the book was called How America Lost Iraq. And it was basically about how the Iraqi people were so happy to see Saddam Hussein overthrown, but about how we mismanaged the occupation so badly that by the time I stopped reporting there were a lot of Iraqi people who were shooting at American soldiers, and kind of the failure to get the electric grid going, and kind of like telling about my experiences. And I had the opportunity to testify before Congress about this. There I am with younger, with more hair and a goatee. And I started to talk, I guess I should just say before I move on that actually you look at this picture, and I was filled with a lot of anger, like I think a lot of veterans are when they're back from war. And I was unembedded, and I had a lot of anger at these American soldiers who were doing a lot of killing. But when I came back, pretty much the only people that I interacted with who thought about the war as like a thing that happened and not a political issue, and could talk about places like Fallujah in terms of streets that were there and like a real physical landscape, were in fact veterans. And so I started to become very close and very friendly with veterans, because even if we had a different political perspective on any particular event, we knew what we were talking about, and we were talking across the same set of facts. And so actually in this picture, the guy who's sitting just to right next to me is Dave Dinello, who actually went on to work for the Obama administration, Customs and Border Protection. But he was a Marine captain in Fallujah when I was there. And we became friends because we figured out that he was shooting in my general direction. And we're still friends to this day. And next to him is Paul Rykoff, who many of you probably heard of, who helped found Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. He and I also have become good friends. And then I started to talk to veterans, and I started to see kind of like the other side of what I experienced. So this guy, the guy with the fist in the air, is somebody I met, and this picture is taken not in Abu Ghraib, but in a situation not unlike it, and he's torturing this person. And when we became friends, he was then addicted to narcotics and heroin and was having a really tough time. This guy, James Eggemeyer, was blown up in a convoy outside of Baghdad, and there was like a pileup, and he had a back condition, PTSD, and traumatic brain injury, and he couldn't get his benefits. And so he was living in a van in South Florida instead of a home. If he had been able to get his disability benefits, he would be okay, but instead he was on the street. And then, of course, we all know the tragic toll of suicide amongst veterans. And so this picture of Jeffrey Lucy, who I never had the opportunity to meet, but I became close to his parents, and he killed himself after returning home in 2004. And so through these conversations, I started to not only want to tell these stories about veterans who were addicted to narcotics that were prescribed by the VA, about veterans who could not get their benefits and ended up homeless, about veterans who came home and committed suicide, but also wanting to investigate the why, wanting to quantify it, and ask, as journalists do, really deliberate questions. And so I ended up writing a few other books. And then I just kind of got tired of just telling stories and really wanted to focus on making an impact, making a difference with my journalism. So I find that when you are reporting a beat, there are so many stories that you could potentially focus on. And so it's good to have one really guiding question that helps you decide what it is that you're doing. And then a couple of more specific questions that you would actually investigate. So I settled on this as like a global question. When they send you to war, they promise you everything, but when you come home, there is nothing. Why? Who is responsible? And who can be held accountable? And then thinking underneath that of different specific things that the government specifically promises people and how the government might be failing. And so these were some questions that I asked myself that I went about investigating. They promise the best healthcare, and yet many veterans commit suicide. Why? Who is responsible? What's going on here? They promise the best healthcare, and yet so many veterans say they're just handed a bag of pills and send them on their way. Is this true? Who is responsible? They promise compensation if you get hurt, yet so many disabled veterans are living homeless on the street. Why? Who is responsible? So each of these are answerable questions, right? And then Francisco and I were just talking before we started about this investigation that it into the GI Bill and profiting off of that. People sign up for the military and go to college. GI Bill is generous, and yet many veterans are falling behind. Why? Who is responsible, right? So I took that big question that's at top, and I thought of the specific promises that the government makes to veterans when they come home. Government promises quality health care, but yet we have suicide. Government promises compensation if you get hurt, yet people are living on the street. Government promises college benefits, and yet people don't feel like they get educated. What is going on here? Each of these are things that can be investigated. So taking them one at a time, the problem of suicide. One of the things that was most disturbing to me when I first started out doing this, which is about 2006, was that I kept being told by people that the military literally did not know how many veterans were committing suicide, and neither did the VA. And this struck me as an impossibility. Like they would say about the Vietnam War, that they believed that more veterans had died after coming home than are on the wall. but I thought, why are you saying that you believe this to be true? Everyone who served in the military, they know exactly who they are. It's a known universe of data. We should be able to answer this question. So the federal government wasn't tracking this, but the California Public Records Act allows you to gain access to state public health records. And I learned that here in California, where I live, that death certificates have a box indicating whether or not the person who died is a veteran and what the cause of death are. And that they had even created this online database that was called EPIC, which tracked so-called injury deaths, which included suicide, car accidents, drug overdoses, et cetera. And so, I think that maybe earlier in this training, you had some talk about like using public records laws and filing PRAs, but a lot of times it's just about like finding the people who will be your friend and help you. So the first thing I did was I made friends with this person who ran this database at the state. And over many conversations about how the database worked, he helped me then learn what to ask for in the Public Records Act request. Because if you just send in a Public Records Act request, the government is likely to like give you the runaround. I mean, you all are in the military, you know about the runaround, right? So you have to be very specific about what you ask for. So talking to these people who work for these government agencies and having them explain to you really boring stuff like how does their database work is really important in helping you craft a Public Records Act request that gets you what you want. And then, I analyzed that data that I got alongside census data that told me how many veterans live where, and then I published this story. And this story ran in the New York Times in 2010, and we found that about 1,000 veterans under 35 died in California of these injury causes between 2005 and 2008. That meant that there were 3 times as many veterans who died in California as service members from California who were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan combined during that same period. And that the rates of death from suicide, car accidents, motorcycle accidents, and overdose were all much higher for younger veterans than who never served in the military. And so basically what we did was we took this fact that the government said was unknowable, how many veterans were dying after coming home, and we proved that it was in fact knowable. And we quantified it using their own data. And as a result of that, the VA ended up using our methodology to begin to survey every state, not just California. And that's how we know that that 22 veterans commit suicide every day. Because the VA has now adopted the methodology that we used in that story back in 2010. And so this kind of shows how you start with this basic question, like they say that it's no way to know how many people are killing themselves after coming home, but it is knowable. We were able to prove that it was knowable. Obviously, I could only look at that small data set from California, but by showing how it could be done, the government then invested in it themselves and started to do their job. And I just wanted to share this. Ruben Paul Santos was a veteran who's featured in the story. And I just want to say like how I reached him. I wanted the person who was in the story to be somebody who had never gotten attention before, who would resonate with the audience, and who had not been part of any group. And so I actually just started to read the obituaries that were running in the San Francisco Chronicle. And there was this one obituary for this person, Ruben Santos, and it said in his obituary that he had died from post-traumatic stress disorder, which was a very interesting thing to say. And then I found out that his parents lived actually within a short bike ride of my house. And this was very, everyone says the war is like far away. And this was a way of just like making it more intimate for the audience to show how close it was, not just to them, but also to me as a journalist. And I went over to the house and I knocked on their door and I explained myself to the family the same way that I'm explaining myself to you now. And they opened their house to me. And they showed me what's on the screen now is some of his poetry that he wrote while he was having a tough time. And so, showing up is also a really important part of investigative journalism. Like getting out of your house, I mean, especially now with the pandemic, we're all out of practice, but like getting out of your house, showing up, and just kind of trusting that if you're authentic and honest, people will open to you. So then I looked at the VA disability claims backlog next, or about the same time. And you all remember this guy. When he was running for president in 2008, he was talking about the fact that the VA bureaucracy was not serving veterans and that it was unacceptable that people were waiting so long to get their benefits. Well, at the time, when he made this comment, there are like 400,000 veterans waiting for benefits. So I came around in like 2011, and it was like twice as bad. There were 800,000 veterans waiting for benefits. So this is like another classic investigative journalism thing. Like, take what the government is saying they're doing, put it up against what they're actually doing. And then another thing that I did was, as probably a lot of you know, because you're vets, the VA has 58 regional offices. So instead of saying, oh, the VA is terrible, we got the wait times for every single office. So we could say that in Northern California, the wait times were over a year. Like if you lived in Oakland, it was this. If you lived in New York, it was that. And that allowed the story to catch fire and also made it personal to people. And so this is another story I did around that time. I also did stories about veterans dying waiting for benefits. Again, the VA said there was no way that they could know how many veterans were dying while they were waiting for benefits. But I learned that it's really, really important when you're an investigative reporter to learn jargon, right? So I learned that the VA has this jargon called accrued benefits. When do you get accrued benefits is if you make a VA claim and they sit on it so long that by the time you die, you cannot be paid personally because you are dead, but your benefits have accrued and they must be paid to your estate. And so when I asked them, like, how many people have died waiting for benefits, they said, we don't know. But when I came back later and I said, how many people have you paid accrued benefits to? The answer to that was 19,500 that year, right? So learning this jargon is really, really important. And, you know, the picture right here was of a World War II veteran. This, I think you had a claim, another training about just like finding documents on the internet through sources like Pacer earlier. One of the things that I learned was that 97% of disability claims were on paper, despite the fact that the government had spent $500 million on a new computer system. And this was the picture. This is the picture of the VA regional office in North Carolina, where the inspector general found there was so much paperwork piled up that it was quite literally impugning the structural integrity of the building. So the federal building was not standing up straight because there was so much VA paperwork. And this picture I found on the internet in a published report on the VA Inspector General's website, which nobody had bothered to read. So this was not even a public records thing. But this thing was the most damning picture because everyone understands, like when you're looking at problems like this, and then you see that, right? It just like people get it. They immediately get it. And then because I was like crashing around to do all these stories, I was getting better sources. Somebody mailed me a thumb drive. I got a thumb drive in the mail from a source that showed that the backlog was much worse than even those other documents told me. And that in fact, the number of veterans waiting for benefits had gone up 2,000% under President Obama. The average time for first-time claims was more than 300 days. That in big cities like New York, it was like LA, it was like upwards of 2 years. So this was fun. Like, you know, like when you have something like this that leads to a problem like that, you know, people like Jon Stewart got involved. And that just kind of kept the story going. I got more tips. And then within a few months, the problem started to get solved because President Obama, duly embarrassed, literally made everyone at the VA work overtime until they got the backlog down. So the number of veterans waiting more than a year dropped by almost 90%. The average wait time fell 112 days, and the number of veterans waiting 2 years fell 99%. So the total journalism win. And it's not like every problem has been solved over there, but there really is a before and after, on this story. And it's based on the kind of like ongoing strategic reporting to get at that one problem and the failure. And in this case, it was like literally a paperwork problem. So then also looking at the opioid epidemic, right? People say they went to war. Like, remember Jonathan Glantz earlier, I went to war, they just gave me pills, then I proceeded to heroin. What they really should be doing is like helping me adjust to the fact that I did the shit in Iraq that's like causing problems for me. There was it's good to read other people's work. So, like I'm a reporter covering veterans, I know the other reporters covering veterans. Like I kept asking the VA, like how many veterans are on opiates? They would say like, we don't know, we can't tell you. Then I read the story that was by a reporter in North Carolina. And it was just about the VA at Fort Bragg. And it had specific numbers about the number of prescriptions for hydrocodone, oxycodone, and a couple of other opiates. And I called him up on the phone. I said, how did you get that? And he said, oh, I filed a FOIA request. I said, how did you write that FOIA request? What was the specific language that you used? And he gave it to me. And then I filed the same FOIA for the whole country. And I literally, this almost never happens with FOIA, but I literally filed the FOIA, went camping for a week with my family, came back and had 10 years of government prescription data in my inbox. Amazing. Luck. Almost never happens. They regret that. But you see like millions and millions of prescriptions increasing over the length of the war. And then the VA's own studies, this was a document that came online. I just found online. You can find the VA's own research papers online. They had done studies that showed that patients at the VA had nearly twice the overdose risk of people who didn't use the VA. And so like, why is that, right? And like, why was this buried on their website instead of like something front and center for the American people? Again, we mapped the prescriptions and this led to tips, who's behind this, who's driving this. And so it was one day I'm sitting at my desk and I get a call from this guy in Toma, Wisconsin, in Western Wisconsin. He's just been fired. It's like this Gulf War veteran. Working in this hospital, he says, like, hey, at my hospital, there's this guy, Dr. Houlihan. His patients call him the Candyman. They call our VA in Toma, Wisconsin, Candyland. And he used the word zombifying his patients. And, this could just be just like an allegation from like a random person, except for remember how I got all this data about prescriptions from every single hospital. So I looked at that data while we were on the phone. I just called it up on my computer for this hospital in Toma, and it showed like a huge increase in oxy prescriptions at this hospital during the time period that this guy was in charge. So I gave this caller some homework. I said, I know that you're onto something, but can you give me something else for me to go on? And he started calling around and gave me other people to talk to. It's another thing to do, give your sources homework. He gave me other people to talk to, which was very helpful. And then finally, he eventually sent me this internal VA document that he got hold of that confirmed everything he was saying. It was amazing. I mean, not everything, but a lot of what he was saying was confirmed by this document. And as I started to talk to people, people started to say, Aaron, I know about this guy who died in the psychiatric ward of an overdose. I got a tip. And of course, like there's medical privacy laws, so people could not give me his name. So they just say, Aaron, I heard that somebody died in the hospital of an overdose. And so again, I just started to read the obituaries. And I found that there was this guy, Jason Simkoski, who had died. It said in his obituary he had died at the hospital, and he was only 35. So I said, maybe this is the guy. So I looked up his parents. I called them. I called his dad, who was like a building supply owner, construction company, small construction company. And he didn't call me back. And one of the things I've learned is sometimes it's good to just let people be. Like if you call them and they don't get back to you, it's okay to like give them a week. to just think about your message. Like, they got your message, right? It's on their phone. They're probably thinking about what to do. And then about a week later, I called him again. I left another message. And then after that, he called me back. Um, and I explained myself. Like, you've been hearing me talk for like half an hour now. I explained myself the way I'm explaining myself to you about the importance that I put on these stories. And I leaned into my own lived experience to the extent that it was relevant. And I leaned into the purpose that I was asking them to share. Like, when you're an investigative reporter, you're often asking people to share the most uncomfortable parts of their life with you. Nobody wants to do that, right? So you need to give them a reason. And so my reason is that basically, in this case, you're going to tell me the story about what happened to your son so that it doesn't happen to other people, right? And that's what I'm going to try to, I can't make any promises, but that's what I'm going to try to accomplish here. And so, as you can see here, I used the medical examiner's reports, which were public. And then I also used the medical records, which showed Dr. Houlihan was involved. I used them to really confirm all the details. And those were provided by the family, because your medical records when you're alive are, like private. Even after you pass, they go to the family, but their death records are public. I also got a log of 911 calls that were made at the hospital. Like, people at the hospital should not be calling 911, but in fact, there were more than 1,000 calls from this hospital to 911 because of all the narcotics abuse. I then went and triangulated those 911 calls, like you could say, where they came from. I requested police reports that were related to those 911 calls. I got toxicology reports of deaths that occurred at the hospital. So basically, if you die in the hospital and it's not suspicious, there's no medical examiner's report, but if there's any suspicious activity involved with the death, you can get the medical examiner's report. So I got those. I went and got reports to the medical board about Dr. Houlihan and other people. Those are also public record. I filed a FOIA to get, as you know, there's also the VA has its own police to find out what was going on in VA grounds. I got a list of people who, from the police reports, I got a list of people who were considered problem patients, like drug abusers, and then I filed a police report, a request to get police records on them. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got these records, because FOIA can go on forever, right? Sometimes you file one of these requests and you're like, when am I ever going to get these documents? So I was up in Wisconsin. I made friends with the secretary to the police chief of the VA. Then she invited me over for dinner with the assistant chief of police. And we talked about the request that I was making and why I thought it was important. And then while I was dealing with the VA bureaucrats who are like, your request is so hard, it's so hard. Meantime, that woman who, the secretary, is like furiously copying everything. She's the one who knows where the records are, right? She's pulling them for me. And she's got her boss in on it too. And so then I called back to the PR person. I was like, hey, I know those records are sitting on your desk. You should just give them to me. And so they did. It was like, a lot of phone calls and mild, pleasant harassment, but like letting them know that they couldn't hide, right? People should know that like they can't hide from you, that you're just going to keep coming and coming and coming until they give it to you, provided that it's a reasonable request. And so in this case, I knew it was on her desk. It was completely unreasonable that they weren't sending it to me. And, I ended up doing another story about the ripple effects of all of these opiate prescriptions and what was going on here. So the picture on the left is there was actually a guy who got prescriptions from Dr. Houlihan who took his van and ran over an Amish buggy and killed a baby. And this was substantiated by me where I got a tip that this had happened. I went and read news coverage for all car accidents involving buggies because it's like a weird enough event that there'll be news coverage. Then the name of the veteran who drove the van and the name of the victim were both in the document. Then I went to the courthouse and I got all of his records from the courthouse, which included the toxicity that was on him when they tested him at the scene that showed that there was oxycodone, hydrocodone in his body. Then I knocked on his door and he talked to me and I was like, hey, I heard that Dr. Houlihan is your doctor. And he's like, he confirmed it. And then I went and interviewed the family. And then the second picture on the picture on my right here is of this Iraq veteran whose girlfriend overdosed on his meds. And in this case, I substantiated it because if you zoom in really close on those pictures, you can see Dr. Houlihan's name on the prescription. And so just like thinking about all the different ways that you can substantiate things, right? The VA doesn't want to tell you all the shit that's wrong with the VA. But when the police show up, they just take pictures of the scene, right? And then you can zoom in and look for things that the VA was itself not looking for. So what happened? This was a huge story. Two congressional committees, the House Committee on Veterans Affairs and the Senate Committee on Government Oversight, both came to this town in Wisconsin and held a field hearing in the Cranberry Lodge. And the pictures, this picture is of all of the sources in my story were then invited to testify before Congress. So the woman in the like the teal, like the more heavyset woman, she's a pharmacist in my story, who's a background source. Next to her is the Ryan, the Gulf War veteran who initially brought the story to me with a tip. Next to him is the father of Jason Simkoski, who died. Next to him is her widow, and next to Heather, the widow, is another widow of another person who died, who we learned about later. They all testified before Congress. Ryan, when President Obama came to Wisconsin on like a campaign trip, he was invited to meet directly with the president, who thanked him for coming forward. This is a guy who was getting fired by the VA when he called me. Now he's meeting with the president. And even better, the Candyman was fired. He lost his job right away. There was a law passed by Congress called the Jason Simkoski Memorial Opioid Safety Act, which was signed by President Obama in 2016. And most importantly, 150,000 fewer veterans are being prescribed narcotics every year by the VA. And although this last one is less than I would hope, there are indeed more non-medical treatments available now than there used to be. So that was a win. And the last story I'm going to talk about before we open up for questioning is about the GI Bill story. Because again, focusing on this question, if veterans have like basically the best education benefit of everyone, why are so many people falling behind in life, right? Especially since people join the military, a lot of folks, just to get an education. So I ended up focusing on the University of Phoenix. Why did I focus on the University of Phoenix? Because at the time that I looked at this data in 2015, University of Phoenix was getting $1.2 billion in GI Bill money. And, you know, for the sake of comparison, Michigan and Cal were getting like almost nothing. So why would it be that this for-profit college, which offers an education which is not considered great by many, would be getting many times as much money from the government as reputable institutions like Michigan, Berkeley, and Stanford? And so I ended up
students at the University of Phoenix often have trouble repaying.
Let me just stop for a second. I ended up interviewing this guy, Garland Williams, who was the vice president of the University of Phoenix related to the military. And I'll just play a little bit of this. This is from a segment on the, This is a segment on the PBS NewsHour that I produced.
Students at the University of Phoenix often have trouble repaying their loans. More than a quarter default within 3 years of leaving school. And at this campus, fewer than 15% of students graduate, according to the Department of Education. I met with retired U.S. Army Colonel Garland Williams. He oversees military programs for all University of Phoenix campuses nationwide. Do you feel like this almost $1 billion of taxpayer money to the University of Phoenix is a good investment for the taxpayers?
The veterans have chosen us because of the programs that we offer. We have over 100 programs that we offer, and they have found the higher education goals that they've sought, and those programs lead to careers that they want to aspire to. So they have chosen us.
Do you have any evidence that it's actually leading to careers for these veterans?
The veterans have chosen us. Yeah, they have chosen to use their entitlement at the University of Phoenix.
So he said the veterans have chosen us. He said the veterans have chosen the University of Phoenix 47 times in a half-hour interview. And in a way that was kind of bullshitty because he wasn't answering my question. But on the other hand, it was true. Like there wasn't anyone like strapping veterans to like a poll and demanding they go to the University of Phoenix. So the question became like, why? Well, again, like just by being out there, by posing these questions, by pushing the envelope, I end up getting a call from somebody who says, I have internal documents from this company. And this was a recruiter at the University of Phoenix. And she basically gave me the playbook that they use to convince people to use their benefits at this school. And part of it was that the University of Phoenix literally paid for access.
It was stories like Dreesen's that led to the president's executive order. The military followed up with new rules that ban inducements, including entertainment, for the purpose of securing enrollments of service members. But what constitutes recruiting? The university paid for the reality TV star Big Smo to entertain the troops. Here at Fort Campbell, the University of Phoenix is spending thousands of dollars to sponsor this concert. It's one of dozens of events the for-profit school is sponsoring on military bases across the country. The University of Phoenix's representative was introduced on stage as a friend of the military.
University of Phoenix sponsor.
He gave away electronic devices.
Giving away 5 Galaxy tablets.
15 minutes after the concert began, the Army kicked me off the base. An Army press officer told me off camera that I was asked to leave because I was talking on camera about the military's relationship with the University of Phoenix. Robert Muth is a former officer.
So you can see how the relationship here between the playbook that I got, the documents that I received that showed me they were buying access to bases, then using that tip to kind of get onto a base and see with my own eyes how that was being deployed. And this story was so fun. This was like the most fun story that I've ever done because I got to do all the things that investigative reporters always talk about doing. I used the Freedom of Information Act. I got internal company documents from a whistleblower. I got thrown off a military base doing a stand-up, which was super fun. And then also another thing that the document showed was that the University of Phoenix was sponsoring these events called Hiring Our Heroes employment fairs, but the whole thing was like a sham. It was just a recruiting event for the University of Phoenix. It violated the president's executive order. But since I wanted to get out of he said, she said, I worked with a couple of veterans who were like legitimately looking for work. And we put like a little camera in a coffee cup and they sat in and they attended the resume workshops and the other events that University of Phoenix sponsored that were used to engage in recruiting. And we knew that this was key to the University of Phoenix plan because of those internal documents that I had. So you see how it kind of like everything works together to support each other. And this was actually oddly the most important finding was that I found that the University of Phoenix was giving challenge coins to service members. And it's not doing the thing in the slideshow, but it had on the underside the logo for every single branch of the service. And as anyone in the military knows, you cannot use the logos of the branches of the service without the service's express permission. I checked with the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and none of them had given this permission. It was a clear violation of the law, and that resulted in them being prosecuted. So what happened? Richard Durbin, as a US Senator, wrote to the Secretary of Defense demanding an investigation. The Pentagon concluded the University of Phoenix broke the law and kicked them off every US military base around the world. The Federal Trade Commission forced the University of Phoenix to pay a $195 million settlement, which is the largest with a for-profit school in the agency's history. Eventually, the VA temporarily banned the University of Phoenix from its GI Bill program entirely. The Apollo Education Group stock crashed. So a lot of people lost a lot of money who were investing in this school, and the company has since been taken private. So just before I open up to questions in a moment, again, just to reiterate, it's super important if there's going to be a topic that you're going to stay on for a while, that you write like a focus statement that helps you decide what exactly your goals are and what you're doing. Because when you do investigative reporting, there's spending a lot of time on something. It's easy to get sucked down like some kind of rabbit hole, like a lot of interesting things come and you could end up wasting a lot of time. So these kind of like focus statements can be so helpful. And then, if you're working for an employer and the employer is like sending you out on like lots of random things, like make sure to keep your own story list of the things that you care about. I mean, while I was doing the stories in this PowerPoint, I was also doing a lot of other stories that were not what I cared the most about. But because I had my own list, I made sure that over time, no matter what my boss wanted me to do today, I was also working on advancing these other projects. So play the long game, right? Like, don't just think, what can I do today? And like, those stories that I shared, you saw that they happened across numerous employers, right? So I kept my own story list. I worked as a freelancer when I was in Iraq. I came back, I was working for the regional pages of the New York Times. I ended up working for the Center for Investigative Reporting. I worked for the PBS NewsHour. Through this whole time, I am keeping my own story list, asking my own questions. Of course, anything that I want to do has to be approved by my boss, or if I'm freelancing, I have to sell it. But like, I am making sure that I'm well-centered and I have my own community of support, because this is really tough work. Again, value and lean into your lived experience. It makes you stronger. It makes you a better reporter. It helps people trust you. Build that community of support, like have other journalists, have buddies that you know from outside of journalism who you value their expertise, that you can be a sounding board, because this can be kind of lonely. If you have a team at work, great. If you don't have a team at work, just make your own team outside of work, and that's something that I've done. And then also know when it's time to turn the page and take on new challenges. Because as you saw in the intro, like I'm currently investigations editor for the California Newsroom, which is a collaboration of NPR stations. I do a lot of work about climate change and wildfires and bankruptcy, and I'm teaching class at Cal about investigating technology companies. I actually don't do this work very much anymore because I was in the war, and as you saw, I worked on this for a long time, and it was time for me to be done with it. And I think that's another really important thing, to kind of know when you have spent enough time. That is my presentation, and I would just love like anyone who wants to chime in with anything at all. Please, I'm excited to hear from you.
So I actually do have a couple of questions. The first one was for your opioid story. You mentioned that you had gotten specific wording for the FOIA. What would be your recommendation for the best wording on FOIA forms?
Well, what I meant by that is like, you can just go online, like Reporters Committee for the Freedom of the Press, for example, will have like great just forms and like language. But what I'm actually referring to is, in that case, like knowing the name of the data system that the VA uses and knowing what jargon they use to describe the way that they track pills, right? Because like, for example, like you saw in the University of Phoenix investigation, I talk a lot about graduation rates. Graduation rates are kept in the system called IPEDS, is the name of the data system that's kept by the Department of Education. Knowing that there's a data system called IPEDS is like a huge win, right? So I think that a lot of times reporters will spend time like trying to answer the question, which is like, what's the graduation rate? But if the people you're dealing with are being jerks, you can step back and go like, well, is there a database where you keep track of graduation rates? What is the name of it? You know? Oh, if you don't keep it, who does keep this database? And you can ask like really like questions like, what are the column headings in the, you know, like, or what software do you use? Or can I talk to the person who maintains the database? Like these like super boring questions. Then you talk to that person, then you can know, okay, when I file the FOIA request, I'm going to ask for something that I know that they have.
Awesome. Okay, Carol has a question. She says, I know everyone has their own shtick, but in your case, how did you go about making friends with the insiders and connectors who gave you language or other access keys?
So I think that you're exactly right. I think that I benefited a lot from becoming known over time. And so a lot of people would know who I am, and I would find the people who would know, who would want to help somebody who was me, right? But if you're just starting out, if you don't have that kind of relationship on the beat, there's a couple of things you can do. Like my favorite, and I still use it a lot, is like the Lieutenant Columbo technique of just kind of like being dumber than I am. I think that that is super useful, and people do naturally want to be helpful, and especially if they feel like you're intimidating because you're a reporter. If you just like act really dumb, it can be actually super useful. Um, and then like the reverse of that is also true, right? Like if you can like really go at them hard, and you know, there's a lot of requirements in FOIA, like you can read up on. Like in California where I live, there's like, they are required to help you know what the record is called, right? And so you can go to like a website like here in California, like the California First Amendment Coalition or Nationally Reporters Committee of Freedom of the Press, and like they'll give you like great legal jargon that you can just like throw at people on the phone. And you say like, well, you know, under subsection 2314, you have to do this. And sometimes that works. And if you're doing with a buddy, then one of you can be Lieutenant Columbo and the other person can be the one like barking the legal language, and you can play off each other. So now that I'm an editor, sometimes I have the reporters do the Lieutenant Columbo thing, and then I'll like back them up with like a colossal nastygram to the boss of the person they're dealing with. And so that works too. So like it helps on a number of levels. Like the good cop, bad cop thing is helpful, but also again, it shows that you're not alone in this pursuit, that you're looking for this thing is being noticed, even if it's just by your colleague, right? And especially if their colleague can like put some mustard, you know, and then you can call them back and be like, I'm so sorry about Aaron, what a jerk, but like, I really do need that, right? So anyway.
Then I also kind of wanted to ask, so since you've been doing this for a while, where do you see the future of investigative reporting with Veterans Affairs issues?
You know, I mean, I would really look to you and like what you guys think. I mean, all the reporting that I was talking about happened in the Bush and Obama eras, right? And like one thing that happened in the Trump era was like a massive privatization of the VA and like the whole choice program that came in. And so one of the things that I really liked about the VA from a reporting perspective is that the American healthcare system is so, the American healthcare system is so fucked up in so many ways. And one of the things that's fucked up about it is that because there's so many companies, it's like really hard to track anything. But the VA was great because it's like all the VA. So no matter how bad it is, it's still all the VA. It's still one place to FOIA. And you kind of learn it has like 135 hospital systems and like so many clinics, and you kind of learn all the jargon, and then you're like good, right? So now with the choice program and the privatization, it's entered in a lot of new issues. And somebody who does really good journalism about those is this guy, Jasper Craven. Craven. You could Google him and kind of look at his work on privatization, which has been pretty good. And it's entered into like whole other layers. I mean, like the VA, for all of its problems, was like reasonably graft free. But like now that there's a lot of like, you know, the profiteering of the GI Bill is not as bad as it was, but like this is offered in like new profiteering opportunities on the healthcare side. And then, you know, one thing that I think has really been undercovered is just like how long these wars have gone on. I mean, obviously that's been covered, but just like, I mean, I was in Iraq when I was a young person, and now I'm 44 years old, right? And so like we who participated in these wars are now middle-aged and older, you know, and I think that if this was Vietnam, we'd be in like 1990, but you know, this is Iraq and Afghanistan, and like we only just left Afghanistan last year, right? So I think that I think all of that is worth considering.
Okay. And then Gretchen asked, just out of curiosity, what is at the top of your list of stories to pursue? She also wanted to know how you landed a job with NPR.
Oh, well, Gretchen, public radio is doing a lot of hiring. So, so like in terms of like the media, it can be like a pretty grim place for employment right now, but like actually public radio is doing quite well. I will say that public radio is a pretty conservative institution, not in terms of like left, right, but just like doing investigations at public radio is like their own comfort level for investigations is something one has to work on, because they're not necessarily into the killer. Like I have not done a hidden camera operation since I ended up in this job, for example. That was in my previous job. But yeah, if you're interested, like there's a lot of opportunities to just apply. I mean, I went to this job that I'm in now because I've become really interested in the climate story, mostly because I live in California and we seem to always be on fire. And I like the thing that I like about the climate story, where like some people might be focused on like the oil companies and carbon emissions and that kind of stuff. I'm really focused on like more brass tacks stuff, like mitigation work, like what are we doing in the forest to make it less likely to burn? Are we maintaining the wires? Like these like really answerable questions, that because that's one thing that makes investigative reporting powerful, is if like you can answer a question and so whose fault it is and bring change. So if there are wildfires being sparked by faulty utility wiring, right, that is something that I can hold the utility company and the government agency that regulates the utility company accountable for. And so that's attractive to me within that arena.
Awesome. And then Sarah had one question, and then Josh also has his hand raised. So we'll do Sarah first and then Josh. Sarah asks, how long did it take you to get the VA jargon down?
It's an ongoing process, right? But I think that I just kept asking, and I cultivated a lot of sources who were insider. Like I mean, like one person that some of you may want to be in contact with is Paul Sullivan. He now works for a law firm in Washington, which is called Bergman and Moore. But earlier, he's a Gulf War vet, and at one point he was pretty high up in the VA benefits bureaucracy. And so I would just call him, right? I mean, the one story that I didn't present was about the number of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans who died after coming home, who were receiving disability compensation and what for. So in 2011, I did a story that found like 11,000 veterans had died after coming home, and that a majority of them were receiving PTSD benefits from the VA. And the reason that I was able to find that out was because I learned that there was like a database at the VA called the Beneficiary Indicator Records Locator Subsystem Death File, the Burroughs death file, right? And so I asked for all records in this Burroughs death file. Well, I just asked for that because Paul told me to, right? So it's like you don't have, you like being a journalist is like a little bit in terms of like being a fake expert is really important to like just like have other people who know all the jargon better than you, who become your friends, who you can just like call over and over again.
Awesome. And then Joshua, you can go ahead.
Hi, Aaron. Thank you so much for putting this together. This is really cool, just some of the stuff that you were showing us. So I'm just starting out on the broadcast side, and my main question is, how do you keep up with that list that you were talking about, you know, list of investigations you want to do while handling those day turns that you're expected to produce every day?
Yeah, so I think that that's why making that list is so important and carving up time to generate the list and then prioritizing what's on the list, right? Obviously, with all those day turns, you're only gonna be able to work with like one thing that's on the list at a time, right? So if you have like 5 things on the list, you know, you can have like all your day turns, and you have like one of them that's like solidly back burnered, right? Where like if you have like 4 hours, then you know exactly what you're going to do with those 4 hours. And then also if you have the list, day turns come up, and you can kind of like try to go for day turns that are related to your list, so that like let's say that you have a story about wildfires, right, is on the list, and then like there's an opportunity to do day turns about wildfires. You'd be like, me, right? I want to do that, because while you're out there doing that day turn, you can also be thinking about what's on your list. You know, like the more that in those day turns you can be a specialist within the newsroom on the things that you also want to investigate, that's also going to be to your advantage. So if you can kind of align those day turns to the bigger questions, that's going to be really helpful to you too. Veterans is a little bit tough because there's like no TV station that wants lots of day turns on veterans, but like other issues that you might want to investigate, like climate change, for example, like there's going to be a lot of day stories on that. So then if you have like the day stories that you're doing, and you also have the bigger things that you're working towards, that can be helpful.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good luck.
Thanks.
Awesome. And Carol also asked who let you do the hidden camera thing. I believe you said that was PBS. Is that right?
Yeah, that was like not easy to get approval for, but I'll tell you a funny story. So we did that so I live in California, and we found out that like this shit was going on at Pendleton, but then I couldn't do it at Pendleton because hidden camera is illegal in California, but in Texas, anything fucking goes, right? So we found out that there was like a similar thing happening at this naval base in Fort Worth. And then our lawyers told us that it couldn't be me holding the camera, but like if it was a veteran who might want to go to this event anyway and might have a legal reason to want to tape it himself, that we would be on like firmer legal footing. And then that veteran also needed to be somebody who would theoretically want to go to a job fair. So I spent a lot of time on the phone trying to find people who lived in Texas, served in the war in Iraq, who hadn't yet used their GI Bill, who wanted to go to a job fair, but also would think it was super fun to hold a hidden camera for a television segment. And so like that was its own reporting challenge, right? So like inside of the reporting challenge is like all in a coffee cup. And then, oh my God, you all will appreciate this. So they're in the car, the two of them are in a car, this veteran, Ryan, and his buddy, because he brought a buddy with him to be his wingman. And I'm in the car trailing them with the camera person. And then they get out of the car and they get to like go through security at the base. And they gotta put the fucking coffee cup through the security. They're like, oh shit, the jig is up. And then Ryan was like, he just said to the security guard, he's like, whoever the guy was there, he's like, hey, will you just hold this for me? I'm like, really don't want to throw this out. And the guy was like, sure, and just passed it around the security. So that could have ended badly, but it's also like, we got a good performer doing it. He was great, he was awesome.
Awesome.
Anything else?
Does anybody else have any questions? Awesome. Okay, well, if nobody else has any questions, I think we are good.
Yeah, I'm gonna put, I will just put my personal email in here.
Absolutely.
If anyone wants to email me like questions later, you're more than welcome to.
I
It's
do have a
absolutely
question.
my pleasure.
Oh, sorry, Carol has one last
I do
question.
have one question. Can you tell us about the kind of collaborations and investigations you're doing over at NPR? What people are interested in?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different desks. So this is my first time working in a gigantic bureaucracy. I work in the California Newsroom, and the California Newsroom is just like a hub for the 17 stations that are in California. So like KPCC in Los Angeles, KCRW in Los Angeles, KQED in San Francisco. I have no reporters who work for me. All these reporters are employed by stations. Most of these stations are not well resourced enough to have an investigations editor. So I will be the investigations editor for KQED in San Francisco or KCRW's reporters. And I'm doing both, like individual station reporters doing work, like KQED just had this great story about how it was just like the VA benefits backlog. It was like victims of wage theft in California. Like if you work at Burger King and your boss doesn't pay you, you're supposed to be able to go to the state and demand to get paid. But the wait time to just get a hearing was 812 days. And there are 36,000 low-wage workers waiting for a hearing. So I just worked with that reporter there to do that. The collaborative investigations I've been doing have been a lot on the wildfire threat because of it's something that brings us all together across the state. And investigations of the way the governor is handling it and the fact that Pacific Gas and Electric Company keeps starting wildfires, stuff like that. There's also something else called the Stations Investigative Unit, which is run out of NPR National, where there's a woman there, Cheryl Thompson, who's like an editor for all the stations around the country that don't have investigations editors. And she does coaching, and she's done some interesting projects. Like she did one that was all about how there's, restricted covenants, like you can't sell the property to a Black person or you can't rent to a Black person. It's in the deed. It's been illegal since the civil rights era, but a lot of those are still in the books. So she did an investigation on that. She did a good investigation on what happens to police officers who kill people, and unfortunately not nearly enough. And again, like because there's so many local police departments working with stations around the country on that. And then there is a national NPR investigations team, but that's kind of like elite journalists, with that investigation reporter title.
Awesome.
Just really quick, is there an equivalent of you in every state, or is it just here in California? The reason I'm asking, I'm actually writing an investigative piece for WHQR in Wilmington, North Carolina, where I was working before I transferred schools out here to California. And my editor's really busy. It's really hard to get kind of like help in shaping the story. It's hard to get federal agencies to respond to things. And so I'm sort of running up against a bunch of dead ends.
The answer is no, but I'm going to put here, like if you're at like a public radio station, she's quite nice. And she's the one with that like national job where she's like a correspondent and an editor. And it is her job to help people like you. She's very nice. Say that you're a veteran, say you found out about it in a training that I ran, and hopefully she'll be helpful. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Now is the time.
Last
All right.
questions.
It's been so much fun. Please, anytime. Okay, like I put my email in the chat for a reason. I'm, like in terms of like actually editing a story, obviously, like I don't have that kind of bandwidth. But if it's like a quick question or like a coaching session or anything like that, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight, Aaron. We really appreciate it. I guess it's still afternoon for you.
Absolutely. Take care, y'all.
Absolutely. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.